Will this river carry them to redemption or ruin? Why would you do this for me?
Because some lives are worth more than mine.
This land remembers. Every stone, every river remembers.
Then let it remember truth, not just blood.
In a world carved by blood and stone, sometimes the greatest battle.
Cowboy ripped the Apache woman's shirt, and at sunrise, 200 warriors wanted his head. The buckskin tore with a ragged whisper that damned my soul for eternity. I stood chest-deep in the violent floodwater of the Red Rock Wash, holding nothing but the remnants of a finely woven Navajo tunic in my trembling, guilty hands. The young woman was alive, breathing hard, safe on the muddy bank. But the cloth, sacred and now shredded, floating downstream like a fleet of broken promises, told a lie to the eyes watching from the canyon rim above. I had dragged her from a grave carved by water. So why did her dark, bottomless eyes hold such a profound, ancestral terror when they landed on my face? Why was she scrambling backward, clutching the remaining fabric to her body like I was the fevered danger she had just barely survived? The rain lashed down on my worn hat, each drop a tiny hammer driving nails into my coffin of confusion. In my world, the cold, hard world of a man who'd spent 40 years upholding justice with a 6-gun and grit, saving a life meant a nod of gratitude, a debt owed. Torn clothing was a casualty, a small, forgettable price for the gift of a new sunrise. But standing there, watching her frantic, desperate eyes scan the red cliffs above, seeing the way she pressed her slender body into the mud as if trying to merge with the earth itself, I knew I was no longer in my world. I was a trespasser in a story written in blood and ancient laws. If you enjoy the story, hit that subscribe button right away. And if you don't, then just hit the like button anyway to keep more Wild West love stories coming. The world spins on, heedless of the lonely man or the broken spirit, and the river keeps pulling those fragments of the buckskin downstream. A man saves a life and is instantly marked for death. A woman is rescued, and the price is her honor. It's the kind of cruel, poetic irony the desert specializes in, isn't it? The kind that makes you want to crawl into a dark corner and simply cease to be, to escape the crushing weight of good intentions gone terribly, irrevocably wrong. Please, just hit the button so a lost soul like mine doesn't feel quite so useless in this vast, indifferent wilderness. 3 hours earlier, Elias Stone, a name that once stood for unbending law between the Rio Grande and the Great Salt Lake, was tracking a ghost. The Rattle Gang. They were no ordinary bandits. They were vultures preying on the weak, and I was trailing them not for coin, but for my own sense of duty, the frayed remnant of my old sheriff's badge that still pressed against my heart. They had hit a lone settler family near Dust Devil Pass, and I owed the dead a reckoning. The Red Rock Wash, normally a trickle of silver over red sandstone, was my only lead, but the flash flood hit without a lick of warning. The sky turned a bruised, ugly black, and the wind screamed with a force that made my old horse, Judge, tremble. I should have hunkered down under a rock ledge, waited for the storm to spend its fury. That's what a sensible man does. But then there was the sound. A human cry, not the whimper of a scared child or the bellow of a lost beast, but the high, clean sound of absolute primal terror, sharper than a blade of obsidian, cutting through the howling wind and the roar of the water. I spurred Judge forward, not thinking of sense or safety, only of the obligation to answer that cry. It led me down the slippery, treacherous slope to the river. That's where I saw her, Nahi, even fighting the torrent, wrapped in the heavy, sodden weight of her traditional dress. She was a figure of fierce, desperate beauty. The river, a liquid demon with foaming teeth, was dragging her towards a jagged cascade of rock that would have ended her instantly. She fought with every ounce of her soul, but the water was winning. I didn't pause for thought, not 1 second of hesitation. I dove from Judge's saddle, hitting the icy churn of the red rock like a sack of rocks. The current grabbed me instantly, a wrestler trying to sweep me off my feet, to roll me under. But decades of ranching and fighting for my life had tempered me like steel. I was strong enough. I reached her just as her struggle began to soften, her grip on life failing. Her eyes, wide and black as a desert night, met mine for the briefest moment. And I saw it. The thing that haunts a man long after the shot is fired and the dust settles. It wasn't just the fear of drowning, no, it was the crushing fear of me. The white man, the stranger, the one who represented every trespass and every broken treaty, the fear of what her rescue might cost her. But the deadly rapids were upon us. There was no time for gentle words or cultural courtesies. Hesitation was death. I grabbed her waist, the thick, wet material of her outer layer bunching in my hand. I pulled with the strength of a despairing man, fighting the merciless pull of the water toward the bank. That's when I heard it, the sound that marked me for a villain, the brutal rip of cloth. Her sharp gasp of pain and fear was swallowed by the storm, but the sound of the tear was deafening in my ears. We were alive. That was the only thing that mattered to me. I clung to that simple, brutal truth until I looked up and saw the faces emerging from the chaos of the canyon walls. They stood there, silhouetted against the boiling black clouds, figures carved from the deep red rock itself. Their arrows nocked, their expressions dark with ancient rage. From their vantage point, from the perspective of a world that had been betrayed countless times, they saw everything. The white man holding torn fabric, the tribal woman scrambling away with damaged clothing, the stark fear written across her features. What they couldn't see, what they refused to accept, was the bitter, simple truth. Nahi huddled against the muddy bank, her breath coming in ragged sobs. She spoke to me then, not in English, but in the rapid, low, desperate language of her people, words tumbling out in a plea that cut me to the quick. I raised my hands, empty and pleading. I was trying to help, woman, only trying to help. My words, useless and foreign, only seemed to fuel the terror in her eyes. She shook her head violently, pointing to the warriors above. Then she did a thing that twisted the knife of my confusion. She grabbed fistfuls of red mud from the riverbank, rubbing it frantically on her arms, on her face, over the torn, exposed skin, as if desperately trying to hide a brand, a mark of shame, or evidence of something far worse. A war cry split the storm, harsh and guttural, answered by dozens of others from every direction. The sound was a chilling promise of blood, and it turned my blood to ice. I had known conflict, but this was the primal, inescapable terror of being outnumbered, surrounded, and judged in a land that was not my own. Nahi grabbed my arm then, her grip surprisingly strong. For one foolish, hopeful second, I thought she was seeking refuge. Instead, she shoved me, hard, pushing me backward into the shallow water. "Go," she hissed, her voice a raw, accented whisper, thick with fear. "They will kill you. Run." But the lead warrior was already descending the steep, unforgiving rock face, moving with the fluid, deadly grace of a hawk striking prey. There was no running now. The path for retreat had been closed the moment I first heard her scream. I was a man of honor caught in a nightmare of misunderstanding, and the price for my chivalry, I feared, was about to be paid in full. The first warrior reached the riverbank, his powerful frame seeming to soak up the water without effort. He was older, braids woven with deep blue beads, and his face was a granite mask of absolute authority. His eyes, when they locked on mine, were not just angry. They were centuries of hatred distilled into a single, lethal stare. He was the judge, the jury, and the executioner, and he hadn't even opened his mouth yet. Nahi threw herself between us, speaking rapidly to the warrior leader. Her voice was thin, pleading, desperate to bridge the gap between their rage and my desperate innocence. But when his eyes finally found the remnants of the torn tunic she was trying to hide, his controlled fury exploded, an invisible, crushing wave. More warriors splashed into the water, forming a loose but lethal circle around me. They were silent now, poised, waiting for the one word, the one sign from their leader to loose the arrows or draw the blades. I felt the awful, sinking realization. Everything I had done to save this woman's life was being interpreted as a violation of her sacred honor. The torn cloth, the mud on her skin, the fear in her eyes, it was all evidence against me. The most damning proof was the wet, wretched piece of buckskin still clutched unconsciously in my useless hand. The lead warrior raised his war club, It was heavy, obsidian-tipped, and it caught the gray, failing light with a malicious glint. Time stretched, thin and brittle. This was it. The truth can be buried deep when a man's heart is already consumed by the lie. Then a new voice cut through the heavy silence, deep, resonant, carrying the unquestionable weight of a man who ruled not by force, but by ancestral wisdom. The war club froze, then lowered. The warriors parted, their eyes still locked on me, but their attention now split by the arrival of the new figure. He was older, wrapped in a blanket of intricate weave, his hair white with the snow of many winters. The dignity of his movement, the steady, cold fire in his dark eyes, marked him as the true patriarch. Tutrung Hastin, the father of Nahi. Nahi went rigid, whispering a single word that was both terror and absolute deference. Shije, father. Oh. Hastin surveyed the tableau, his daughter, shamed and muddy. The white man, me, standing waist, deep in the sacred red rock wash, holding the evidence of her damaged honor, the circle of 50 ready men. When he spoke, it was in the rhythmic, powerful cadence of the Navajo tongue, but the meaning was clear. He demanded answers. Nahi responded, her voice trembling but gaining strength as she pointed toward the river, toward me, toward the floating scraps of cloth. Her father listened, his expression a worsening storm, and I watched my fate being sealed with every word. I saw the exact moment his face hardened into a mask of pure, controlled rage. Whatever she was telling him, it was not clearing my name. It was simply confirming the wound to their pride. Then came the unexpected act. Nahi pulled a small, worn leather pouch from inside her tunic and thrust it towards her father. Hastin took it, examined its contents, and the storm in his eyes shifted. The rage was still there, but now it was directed elsewhere outside of this circle. He barked an order. Several warriors immediately began searching the riverbank, casting their eyes up the steep canyon walls, looking for something specific. "What is it?" I asked him, the words hoarse in my throat. I knew he didn't speak English, yet I had to ask. "What are they looking for?" To my shock, Hastin turned and spoke in heavily accented but perfectly clear English. "They look for the men who chased my daughter into the water. 3 men. The words hit me like a kick in the gut. 3 men, plural. She hadn't fallen. She had been running. How many? I repeated, my mind racing through the tactical implications. Hastin's eyes narrowed, cold and assessing. "You do not know? You were not with them?" "I was tracking cattle, no. I was tracking outlaws when I heard her scream. That's when I found her in the current." Hastin studied my eyes, his gaze piercing through my years of hard living and self-control. He was reading my soul, looking for the lie. The silence was thick, broken only by the drumming of the rain and the anxious movement of his warriors. "My daughter says you saved her life," he finally declared, the admission costing him visible effort. "She also says 3 men on horses drove her to the water's edge. Men with pale eyes and yellow hair. Like you." The implication was as sharp as a newly chipped arrowhead. Even if I wasn't one of them, I was like them, guilty by association. In a world defined by the lines drawn between white and red, I was the one standing on the wrong side of the divide. A warrior shouted from upstream, holding something up, his hand wrapped around a small object that made Hastin's face darken with renewed thunder. It wasn't cloth. It was a chunk of gold ore, rough and jagged, unlike any natural deposit found in the immediate area. It was not from the tribe's land. It was foreign. "One of the men must have dropped it when they chased her down the slope," Nahi whispered, stepping closer to me, closer to the danger, forced by the truth. "It is from the Rattle Gang, the men who stole the Bando Thuan Luyen." The Rattle Gang, the outlaws I was tracking, the ones who had killed a settler family near Dust Devil Pass. Now, I knew, this wasn't just a rescue gone wrong. It was a collision of 2 separate battles for justice. He hadn't been a random victim. She was a scout, pursuing the men who had desecrated her tribe's most sacred property, the map to the Silver Spring, their ancestral heartland and, more recently, their only source of potential wealth. "That's not just ore, Chief," I said. my voice steady now, devoid of fear, filled only with the hard, cold certainty of a man who knows his enemy. That's gold from an illegal claim. A claim belonging to Barden Rattle, and I know how that snake operates. More war cries began to echo through the canyon, not from the 50 men here, but from others approaching fast, a rising tide of sound that seemed to shake the very red rock beneath our feet. "They've been tracking them for 3 days, Nahi whispered to me, her eyes wide with a new kind of dread. Now they will think you are a part of them. They will hunt you down. I felt the blood drain from my face. Surrounded by over 100 men now, prayer becomes mathematics, the math of how long my single revolver could hold off a tide of arrows and clubs. My only hope for survival, my only chance to preserve my honor and achieve the justice I craved, was to make a deal with the very people who were moments away from killing me. I looked directly into Hastian's unforgiving eyes. I know this Rattle man. I know his hideouts and his mind. He's running for the coast with your sacred map. You need a tracker who knows the white man's game. Your daughter has saved my life by telling the truth, I stated, the words firm and unyielding. Now, I will pay that debt. Let me lead you to Rattle. Let me help you restore your justice. Hastian studied me one last time, a lifetime of suspicion warring with the desperate, clear-eyed truth in his daughter's face. The 100+ warriors waited in absolute silence. Finally, Hastian nodded, a stiff, minimal movement that felt like the earth had shifted on its axis. "You will lead us, Elias Stone," he said, the name sounding foreign and heavy on his tongue. "But if you lie, if you lead us into a trap, the desert will drink your blood, and no man will ever speak your name again." It was a deal struck between enemies, cemented by necessity and the single, unifying desire for justice. The hardest trails to follow are the ones that lead toward redemption, and mine had just begun. If you like Wild West love stories or Wild West stories, drop a bunch of 1 second and your place in the comments for the Wild West Love channel. Tell me where you're listening from so I don't feel so alone out here. The silence of the desert after a storm can crush a man's spirit far harder than a bullet, and knowing there are others out there, listening to the echoes of my old, bitter life, gives me a reason to keep breathing, to keep chasing a justice that never seems to stay caught. Drop a one, friend, and let me know I'm not just talking to the dust and the ghosts of my past. The dawn broke over the Red Rock Valley, the rain-washed cliffs gleaming like fresh wounds under a sky still heavy with the threat of more storm. I sat by a small, smoky fire that had done little to dry my clothes, watching Nahi. She was braiding her long black hair with quick, efficient movements, tying it back for the pursuit. She had changed out of her ceremonial tunic, now wearing simple, sturdy buckskin pants and a plain, dirt-stained shirt, the uniform of a woman who was a warrior as much as a scout. The shredded garment that had almost cost me my life had been carefully gathered by the elder women, awaiting the long, painstaking process of repair. Hastian had selected a pursuit party of 30 of his best trackers and riders, all mounted and supplied for a chase that could last a week. The rest remained behind, their weapons ready, their eyes still watching me with the cold, hard suspicion of a people who had learned the bitter cost of trust. Nahi came and settled beside me, poking at the fire with a short, charred stick. Her English, when she spoke, was quiet and controlled, clearer than her father's, but colder. "You know this Rattle man better than you admitted yesterday, Elias Stone," she observed, her eyes fixed on the sparks rising into the gray air. "I could see it in your face when my father spoke of the ore. You were not just surprised, you were angry. A white man does not get that kind of anger unless he has seen the true face of the devil he chases." She was too perceptive, too sharp for a simple rancher to handle. She was right. I didn't see the point in lying to her, not when our lives now depended on the brittle thread of this alliance. 3 years ago, I began, my voice rough with the memory. The Rattle gang hit a ranch near my own place, Silver Creek, killed a mother and her 2 boys, stole everything. They were deserters then, Barden Rattle and his brother. We tracked them, my deputy and I. Got the brother, but Barden Rattle, that snake, got away. My jaw tightened. The shame of that failure still tasted like ash, He had yellow hair and eyes like chipped ice, the worst of the bunch. Smart, ruthless, completely without a conscience. Nahi's stick stopped moving, hovering over a small ember. You think he is the same one who stole the Bando Thuan Luirn? I'd bet the last of my silver on it, I confirmed. The grim certainty a cold weight in my chest. Rattle always worked with a crew of 2 or 3. Deserters, petty thieves, men who loved money more than God, and thought they could buy their way to Mexico. This was no longer a rescue mission or a hunt for cattle rustlers. This was the pursuit of known killers and desecrators, men who would murder innocents without a second thought, men who would never surrender peacefully. The stakes had just been raised far past my initial promise of justice. Now it was personal honor. Hastian approached the fire, his expression still a grim mask. "My scouts have found their trail," he announced. "They headed east, toward Dust Devil Pass, just as you predicted. But they are not alone anymore. The tracks are difficult, but the wind brought us a message. They have met with others, perhaps 6 or 7 riders now." My stomach dropped like a stone. 7 men instead of 3. The odds had just tipped into the territory of suicide. 30 against 7 well-armed, desperate outlaws was one thing. But 7 men with military training, holed up in a town or an abandoned mine, it made the blood run cold. There was something else in Hastian's gaze, a dark certainty that unnerved me more than the numbers. "What is it, Chief?" I asked. He held up a piece of bark, folded and water-stained, but with a message clearly scratched into the surface. They left this pinned to a dead juniper near their meeting place. "It is intended for us." I took the bark and read the rough, arrogant scrawl. "To the savages following us. We have your trinkets. Keep coming and we'll burn the map before we bury the ashes. One sun to turn back, or your precious holy things become kindling. B. Rattle." Rattle knew we were coming. Not only that, he was using the stolen artifact as leverage, engaging in psychological warfare. This was not just about theft. It was about forcing the Navajo into an impossible choice: surrender the chase and let the desecration stand, or risk watching their most sacred Bando Thuan Luirn go up in smoke. Nahi read the note over my shoulder, a sharp, ragged sound catching in her throat when she saw the initials. "You were right. It is Rattle." "There is more," Hastian added, his voice low and dangerous. "The scout found evidence that they have been in contact with local lowlifes near Dust Devil Pass. This Rattle, he has been building an army of desperate men, an army of criminals, united by greed and led by a man with no conscience. They were armed, they were desperate, and somewhere ahead, Barden Rattle was waiting with the tribe's most precious spiritual possession, daring us to come and try to take it back." "We have to move," I said, rising quickly. "He's bluffing, Chief. Look at the message. He threatens to burn the map, not that he already has. He needs that map. He's not just a killer, he's a businessman. The map is worth more to him whole than burn." My words, the logic of a white man's greed, seemed to strike a chord with Hastian. He stared toward the rising sun, where a thin column of black smoke had just begun to smudge the horizon. "That is the smoke of wet wood and canvas," I stated, certainty ringing in my voice. "He's making a show, a distraction. He's burning something cheap to panic us into a reckless attack." Hastian looked at me, a flicker of something new, not trust, but reliance in his dark eyes. "How long until we reach Dust Devil Pass? If we ride like the devil himself is chasing us, we can be on his tail by sunset," I promised. "But we must not attack in the open. Rattle is expecting that. We have to use the landscape, use the dark, and use the fact that his greed is his weakness." The column of smoke grew thicker, darker, marking the enemy's location like a brand. It was the calculated cruelty of a man who knew exactly how to wound a spiritual people. But now they had me. A man who understood the language of desperation and the mathematics of a close-quarters fight. We were still 30 against 7, but now we had a plan and a shared fire that began to melt the ice of their suspicion. For the first time, Nahi met my gaze, and I saw a reluctant kind of partnership there. It wasn't love yet, not even close, but it was the start of something profound, a mutual sacrifice of comfort and safety for the sake of a greater justice. The sun was fully up, and the chase began. "Hey there, friend, take a moment and get yourself a full glass of water. It's easy to forget, but staying hydrated is crucial for your health. Also, if you've been sitting for a while, do a quick lap around the room and give your eyes a break from the screen. Your body will thank you." In the chaos of life, it's the little things we neglect, like a glass of cold water, or the simple need to stretch these old bones that can break us. Don't be like me, Elias Stone, who only remembers his needs when the desert sun is baking the sense out of him. Take care of yourself, because out here, there's no guarantee the next moment of justice won't be your last. We rode hard, following the smoke that marked Rattle's temporary stronghold like a malevolent beacon. It led us deep into the Badlands, a fractured, brutal landscape of jagged red rock and thorny scrub brush that tested the endurance of every rider and every horse. Rattle had the foresight of a clever coward. He knew the high ground was everything. We crested a ridge overlooking the vast expanse of the valley that led toward the desolate mining settlement of Dust Devil Pass. Below us, the smoke was thicker now, rising from a dry, rocky canyon that offered only one way in and one way out. It was a perfect killing ground. "There," I muttered, pulling Judge to a halt and dismounting quickly, keeping low behind a spine of rock. "The canyon mouth. He's holed up in the old prospector's camp, using the high ground. 7 men, Chief, maybe 8, by the look of those fire positions. He's anticipating an assault from the front, a rush of reckless desperation." Hustine and Nahi dismounted silently beside me. The 30 warriors melted back into the shadows and crevasses, becoming one with the rock, a discipline I hadn't expected from men who'd only hours ago wanted my scalp. "He wants us to break cover and charge," Nahi observed, her voice low, her eyes scanning the positions Rattle's men had taken. "He wants to destroy the map in front of us, making our sacrifice meaningless, forcing a full-scale war, then escape in the panic." "Exactly," I affirmed. "Rattle is an arrogant snake. He's always one step ahead in his own mind. He won't expect us to read his book. He's expecting the chief's honor to demand a direct fight. He's not expecting an old lawman's patience." My eye caught a cluster of loose, jagged rock about 50 yards from the canyon entrance, a clear choke point. "That's where he'll put his weakest men, using the rocks for cover, counting on our direct approach. We need to go around. 2 teams. One team distracts, the other team secures the exit." Hustine, however, pointed toward a narrow, barely visible goat trail that skirted the highest, most treacherous peak of the ridge. "My warriors can take the high trail. They are mountain men. Rattle's thieves will be watching the flat ground." "Too slow," I countered, shaking my head. "If Rattle sees any movement above, he'll know. We need a faster, more unpredictable path." I pointed to a steep, rocky ravine that plunged down into the valley floor, a path Judge would never be able to navigate, a path that was suicide for a man on horseback. "We go on foot. The shortest path is always the deadliest. I need 3 men to follow me into that ravine. We will appear behind them, take out his flank guards, and create the diversion." The idea was madness, the kind of brazen sacrifice only a man who had already faced his own death countless times would propose. Hustine stared at the ravine, then at me, the suspicion returning to his eyes, sharper than ever. "Why would you risk your life for our map, white man?" he challenged, his voice cold. "You have already earned your life. Run now. No one will blame you." "Because I need to finish what I started 3 years ago," I said simply, meeting his gaze. "Because the Rattle Gang represents the worst kind of sickness in the West, and until he's gone, no one settler or Navajo will find justice. And because of Nahi." The admission hung in the dry air. Not a declaration of love, but a statement of duty. I had seen her courage. I was obligated to protect that. Nahi stepped forward, her hand resting lightly on the hilt of her knife. "I will go with Elias," she declared, her voice firm, overriding her father's authority for the first time. "He knows the white man's tactics. I know the stone. Together, we are faster than any horse." Hastian looked from his daughter's determined face to my stoic, unwavering expression. The pride of a father battled with the tactical mind of a chief. He slowly nodded. "If you fall, Elias Stone, my daughter will fall with you. Remember that." It wasn't a threat. It was a bond forged in mutual risk. We began our descent into the treacherous ravine, moving in the growing shadows as the sun began its brutal, slow drop toward the western rim. The rocks were slick, the footing uncertain, and every downward step felt like a promise of broken bones. We found the trap halfway down. Rattle was slick. He hadn't just relied on firepower. He had used the landscape. A small rock slide had been carefully triggered just hours before, completely masking the true trail and redirecting any pursuers toward a false path that ended in an open field, directly under the rifles of his sharpshooters. "He's good," I muttered, brushing rock dust off my clothes. "Almost as good as me. But I've been on both ends of that trick." One of the younger Navajo warriors following us, brave but too eager, slipped on the unstable scree. He cried out, his foot caught, and a massive slab of red rock broke loose above him, tearing down the slope. "Hold!" I roared, throwing myself onto the loose earth. I only had a second. To save the warrior, I needed a strong anchor point, a thick rope, and something heavy to change the rock's direction. The only thing I had that was heavy and dispensable was my prized, custom-made buffalo rifle, the one my father gave me, the only connection I had left to my old life. He didn't hesitate. I unslung the rifle, jammed the butt end deep into a crevice, and looped my rope around the barrel. "Nahi, give me a cut," I shouted. She understood immediately. She drew her knife and severed the heavy rope I was using to rappel, freeing me to use the length. I anchored the rope around my chest, took a breath, and used my body as a human brace against the falling rock, yelling for the warrior to pull free. He managed to scramble out just as the slab struck my rifle, snapping the wooden stock with a sound that tore at my heart more than the torn buckskin had. The steel barrel twisted, ruined. My rifle, my legacy, my only remaining symbol of the law I once upheld, was gone. The young warrior was safe, breathing hard. My hands were shredded. My rifle was dead, but I had saved him. I looked at Hastian, who had witnessed the entire swift exchange. His granite face had softened, but only slightly. "You traded a life for wood and iron," Hastian said, his voice quiet, almost respectful. "I traded a piece of my past for a piece of our future, Chief," I corrected him, feeling the hard, simple honor of the choice settle in my soul. I had made a sacrifice of my own, personal relic to save one of his men. The line between us had just grown thin. Nahi looked at the shattered rifle, then at me. Her eyes held not the fear I'd seen before, but a kind of profound, agonizing curiosity. That was the moment I knew she would trust me completely. The man who willingly sacrifices his most treasured possession for another's life is not a thief. He is a force for justice. The alliance was now cemented, not in words, but in the costly currency of blood and wood. We had bought ourselves time, but Rattle would know the silence meant an alternate approach. We had to move, and we had to move now. Dust Devil Pass waited, and with it, the final confrontation. If you're watching on TV, don't hesitate, grab your phone and hit subscribe to my channel so you'll never miss out on our amazing characters. This world is filled with men and women like Elias and Nahi, driven by a destiny more complex than any of us can imagine. Don't let their struggles for love and honor in the Wild West pass you by. Hit subscribe. We moved through the night, a shadow of vengeance and justice creeping toward the lights of Dust Devil Pass. The town was a miserable, desperate smudge of humanity. A single saloon, a few clapboard houses, and the black, skeletal remains of an abandoned mine on the outskirts where Barden Rattle and his gang had barricaded themselves. The Bandothwan Luirn, the sacred artifact, was Rattle's insurance. He was using the threat of its destruction to buy time, planning to pass it to a mining syndicate waiting in the next town, a scheme that would turn the sacred silver spring into a poisoned well of greedy gold. Rattle wasn't a monster of passion, but a calculating monster of commerce. "The saloon is the key," I explained to Hastian and Nahi, pointing to the rickety structure near the mine entrance. "He'll have lookouts there, and one runner." His plan is to keep the heat on the mine entrance, use the saloon as a diversion, and slip out the back with the map if we charge. We hit the saloon first. Fast. Clean. No shooting unless they shoot first. We take out his eyes. Hastine nodded, a rare sign of full acceptance. My men will take the perimeter. Nahi and you will enter the saloon. It is the white man's ground. You know the dark corners of these places better than we. It was a test, a final, dangerous test of my honor and my competence. Nahi and I slipped through the back alleys of Dust Devil Pass. The town was quiet, except for the mournful sound of a broken piano tune drifting from the saloon. The air was thick with the smell of cheap whiskey, old fear, and dust. We paused at the saloon's rear entrance. Rattle is an old soldier, I whispered, my hand resting on the smooth, familiar grip of my Colt revolver, the only weapon I had left. He'll have 2 men in there, one drinking, one watching the door. We move on my count. When the fighting starts, Nahi whispered back, her breath warm against my ear, a sudden, jarring intimacy in the heart of the danger. I will use the knife. I do not want to shed blood unless it is necessary. Understood, I said. A strange mix of admiration and tough love filling my chest. Her moral code was as fierce and unyielding as my own, just forged in a different fire. This shared duty, this willingness to risk everything together, was the closest I had ever come to feeling true love in this desolate land. We kicked the door open. The saloon went silent instantly. 2 men, 2 of Rattle's deserters, sat at a table, cards scattered, whiskey bottles on the floor. One was tall and sickly-looking, the watcher. The other, the runner, was short, nervous, with a heavy shotgun on his lap. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice calm, projecting the cold authority of the lawman I used to be. "The game is over. Justice has arrived." The watcher, surprised, went for his pistol. Boom! Nahi was a blur. She hadn't used her knife, but her bow. The arrow, swift and silent, pinned the man's hand to the bar top before his pistol cleared leather. He screamed, a high, pathetic sound of pure agony. The runner panicked, raising his shotgun. I didn't wait. I drew my Colt and fired 2 rounds into the wooden beam above his head. The thunderous echo deafened the room. Splinters rained down. He froze, his eyes wide, his courage instantly evaporated. "Drop it," I commanded, my revolver unwavering. "You're done." The runner let the shotgun clatter to the floor. Nahi was already beside the screaming man, pulling her arrow out in one swift, brutal motion, and using the point to hold the man's gaze. The fight was over in 5 seconds. Precision, speed, and absolute commitment. That was the new law we were writing together. We secured the prisoners, and I sent a signal whistle to Hastian's men on the perimeter. The time for the direct assault was upon us. "The mine entrance," I said to Nahi. "Rattle will hear that scream. He'll be expecting us to come through the front door." "We go through the ventilation shaft," Nahi finished, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of the chase. "Rattle will have his back to the wall, waiting for the predictable fight. He won't be expecting a fight from the rock itself." We found the old shaft entrance, a narrow, wooden-framed hole half hidden in the scrub. I went first, lowering myself into the blackness, feeling the cold, damp earth against my hands. I moved like a ghost, relying on the memory of the light and the faint, chemical smell of old explosives. The air shaft led to a small, abandoned storage room near the heart of the mine. In the main tunnel, I could hear Barden Rattle's voice, raised and angry, talking to his brother about the commotion outside. "The savages are here. They've killed the lookouts. Barden, the map. We have to destroy it, or they'll use the Silver Spring against us." "No, the map is worth a fortune," Rattle snarled. "We hold them off. We make them an offer they can't refuse." I pushed open the flimsy door and stepped into the lamplight. Nahi was right behind me, her bow drawn, an arrow nocked. Barden Rattle and his brother were standing by a small table. The sacred map, a piece of ancient, beautifully drawn buckskin, lay there. Rattle had a pistol in his hand. "Rattle," I said, my voice steady, pulling all my old lawman's authority around me. "The game is over. Drop the gun and surrender the map. You've lost." Rattle turned, his yellow hair matted with sweat, his eyes the familiar pale chips of ice, I remembered. He grinned, a nasty, hateful smile. "Brooks, you interfering old fool.